Hello and welcome to our podcast on the types of characters in literature. We're going to be talking about dynamic, static, and foil pairs. Let's go ahead and see what we're talking about. So like we said, we are going to be focusing our presentation on dynamic characters, static characters, and foil pairs of characters. And then we subdivide foil pairs to talk about two types of pairs, those that remain at odds and those that come together. So why do we want to study characters? Characters are what advance the plot. So if we're talking about the plot in terms of the hero's journey, the 12 steps that a dynamic hero needs to be taking in order to progress through a text, that character must actually do something. And so that is how plot advances. So we might as well study what characters do. We also want to be looking at how characters change or a lack of change can help reveal the theme of a text. And theme or themes of a text are the comments about life and living and being human that the author is trying to make. And so we can examine characters if they change, if they don't, why they do, why they don't, to kind of figure out what the author is saying about all of humanity through those characters. And so how do we find these types of characters? Well, looking at the typical ways that authors characterize characters, that is a good start. So we want to look at what they say, what they do, what they think, and what others say about them. All of these moments can reveal what the character's really about, who they really are, what they're thinking, feeling, believing. We also want to assume that a character we meet is static, meaning unchanging, until proven otherwise. Because if that character does not change, they are indeed static. But if that character is going to eventually become a dynamic character, so they change, they grow, they mature, then we have to see the events and the items and the conversations and all of the moments that actually take that static character and move them toward the dynamic character realm. And so if they do change, we really want to focus on what causes them to change, because those are going to be clues that the author is giving us about the author's point about being human, about humanity. So the first type of character we want to look at is the dynamic character. And so by definition, this is a character that goes through significant inner or personality change throughout a text. So this is not a character who starts the book at age 9 and grows up to age 12 at the end. That doesn't necessarily mean they are a dynamic character. To be called a dynamic character, that character has to have significant learning about the world or about themselves. So they are changing and growing and maturing and seeing the world differently. They are becoming a better person. They are becoming a different person rather than just growing up. Qualify someone as a dynamic character. Now, typically, the protagonist of a text is a dynamic character. So when we're thinking of that hero's journey, our hero is typically a dynamic character, because who wants to read a text where the protagonist doesn't grow or change or learn or improve themselves? That doesn't really seem to be a very inspirational message. And so when we are examining dynamic character, we can tie that to a potential theme statement by the author. And so we do that by examining that character change. What causes them to change? What does that character learn while on that journey? How do they become different or more mature or more engaged in society? And then we can analyze what causes them to change and why did they change and what did they learn to put that together and form a theme statement about what the author is trying to say about life or about being human through this character's change. And so for our visual learners out there, you can see where dynamic characters typically fit into that hero's journey. You can see on the bottom left, that is probably where our protagonist, our hero, is going to start in that ordinary world. They're going to go on some extensive and complicated journey. And then in step 10, which we call the transformation, that is where that character has become dynamic, where that character has grown, has learned, has reflected upon their journey, and they become a better, different, more mature person by the end of that journey. So let's take a minute and look at some examples of dynamic characters throughout some great pieces of literature. For example, in the book Lord of the Flies, the characters of Ralph or Jack both begin the story by being respectable British schoolboys, but by the end, they have changed to be relatively violent, savage children who are left to their own devices on this island. In A Christmas Carol, the main character, Ebenezer Scrooge, begins as a miserly and aloof penny pincher, but becomes by the end a very generous-hearted man. In the Harry Potter series, you can focus on a bunch of different characters who are dynamic, but one is Neville Longbottom, who starts the series as a shy, introverted young boy and becomes a pretty brave and obvious leader of his classmates. So all three examples are of dynamic characters. These characters change, grow, and mature over the course of a text. And so our job is to A, observe that, B, follow the things that push these characters to change, and then C, to reflect on why and how they've changed, and see if we can figure out what the author is saying about society because of these characters' changes. The second type of character we'd want to look at are static characters. Unlike dynamic characters, these are characters who do not go through significant change throughout a text. And so we see static characters sprinkled throughout the plot or the hero's journey of a text. And so they can serve in a variety of roles. They could serve as a foil to the protagonist as their sidekick. So we'll talk about this next, where a foil pair is a pair of characters who clash at a fundamental level. And so a static character can serve as a foil to the protagonist, because as the protagonist is typically a dynamic character, changing, evolving, growing, the static sidekick might just stay how they are, where they are in society, etc. A static character could also serve as a mentor to the protagonist, because typically in texts, the mentor characters have already gone through their growth. And so they are, by the time our hero meets them, they are static. They are universally in the teaching role. They're not going to change. Additionally, a static character could serve as an ally to the protagonist, somebody who helps the protagonist on their hero's journey. But the character themselves does not actually change. Static characters can also serve as kind of negatives in the plot structure. So they could serve as a foil to the protagonist as their antagonist. So whereas before that static character might be helping the hero, we can also have a static character who is working against the hero in the role of the antagonist. Or slightly different, they could serve as an enemy to the protagonist. So maybe not the highlighted antagonist, the greatest force that our hero is fighting against, but a sort of smaller enemy that they have to deal with along the way. And so how does a static character tie to theme? Well, these characters do not change. So why don't they change? Could it be because the role they are playing is simply solid bad guy? Is it because they are playing the role of unique mentor? Is it because they're playing the role of sassy sidekick and they don't need to change in the text? But a nuance to that is maybe these characters should have changed. Maybe they should have gotten better. They should have become nicer. They should have matured. And so what is the author saying about life or about being human when we examine a character who does not change? And so you can see visually where static characters tend to show up in the hero's journey. So they could certainly start off in the ordinary world as a sidekick to our protagonist or our hero. They could enter the journey later in step 4 as the mentor. Perhaps they enter around stage 6 where they are an obstacle that the hero needs to fight against. Or perhaps they are the greatest force that the protagonist needs to fight against in stage 7. So let's take a minute and look at some examples of static characters. So a static character serving as a foil to the protagonist as their sidekick might be Mercutio, serving as the foil to Romeo in the play Romeo and Juliet. Where Romeo is very solemn and very serious, Mercutio, like his name suggests, he is mercurial, like the planet Mercury. He is lighthearted and jovial, so he serves as a foil to the protagonist of Romeo, but on the same side. He's kind of like his sidekick, his buddy, his friend. Another example where we have a static character serving as a mentor could be the character of Faber in the book Fahrenheit 451. Faber gives advice to the main character of Montag about what he should do about wanting to bring down the system. Faber is that way the first time we meet him. He is that way the last time we see him in the text. We also have a static character that could serve as just a general ally to the protagonist. So not necessarily a foil serving as a sidekick, but some other character who is an ally, a similarly thinking character who is just helping out our hero. And so in the text of Hamilton, we might have John Laurens and Hercules Mulligan. They aren't foils because they don't necessarily have completely clashing belief systems to Hamilton, but they are Hamilton's friends and his allies. but John Lawrence and Hercules Mulligan don't really change and grow. On the negative side, we could see a static character serving as a foil to the protagonist as their antagonist. So for example, Harry Potter, we have Voldemort. He is a foil. He is a clashing entity to Harry Potter. For all the good that Harry Potter is, Voldemort is negative. But Voldemort never changes. He never grows. He never gets better. He never realizes that what he's doing is so bad. You could also have static characters who just serve as generic enemies to that protagonist, such as Dolores Umbridge in Harry Potter or Bob Ewell in To Kill a Mockingbird. And the last type of character we'd like to look at is what we call that foil pair. And so by definition, this is a character who contrasts and clashes with another. Not just because they're different, like they're a couple years older or they dress a little bit differently. This is some sort of clash highlighting the qualities of the character. So passionate and emotionless, quick on their feet, slow to react, follows the rules, does not follow the rules. Generally good, generally bad. Those would be clashes and contrasts that would count as a foil pair. And so then we subdivide this a little bit, and we see that foil pairs work in different ways throughout texts. So we could have a foil pair that is the hero and its sidekick. We could have a foil pair that goes throughout the entire text and remains at odds, meaning they don't like each other at the beginning and they don't like each other at the end. Or we could have the foil pair that starts off as a foil pair and contrasts, but by the end of the text they have learned from each other and they come together, as we say. They become more friendly. They might even absorb some of each other's qualities. And so again, that analysis piece, we have to ask ourselves, how does the examination of the foil pair help reveal theme? Well, when a foil pair remains at odds, why do they remain in conflict? Should they have learned something? Should they have gotten together and figured out each other had some redeeming features or something? What is the author saying when a foil pair stays at odds? Also, when a foil pair does become closer, what causes them to become closer? What have they learned? Why are they now more friendly at the end than they were at the beginning? And so what is the author trying to say about life and about being human when a foil pair comes together? Or when a foil pair remains at odds? That is our job as readers performing literary analysis, but using the foil pair as a topic to look at. And so here's where we can see foil pairs typically show up in the hero's journey. At the very beginning, like we said, we might see a foil pair as sidekick, where we have our hero, they have a sidekick with them, and they just kind of work together throughout the whole hero's journey. Around stage 6, we might see foil pair as enemies, where our hero has to engage in some sort of struggle against a foil that has the complete opposite personality, complete opposite view of life, etc. And then at the end of the hero's journey, stages 8, 9, 10, we might see that foil pair that comes together. So that could be the sidekick who started off as clashing, but by the end they have become best buddies. That could be the pair of characters who are forced to work together and they hate each other, but by the end of the journey they are now best friends. And so we can look at some examples of foil pairs staying at odds. And we can also see some examples of foil pairs coming closer to each other and learning from each other and absorbing each other's qualities. So some examples from literature. We can see the foil pair as sidekicks model from Of Mice and Men when we see the characters of George and Lenny. Both are main characters. Both are experiencing the same hero's journey, but they are most definitely a foil pair. And so they are working together to go through this journey. In the text, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, you get the main character of Junior and his seemingly sidekick character of Gordy. They are a foil pair. Junior is somewhat academically minded. Gordy is very academically minded. Junior doesn't really know what he's doing in the new school. Gordy really understands how this school works. We can then look at a foil pair that remains at odds, meaning a foil pair that does not get along from the very start, and all the way through a text or all the way through a series, these two characters never learn from each other, never come together, never become friendly. So for example, Harry Potter, we have Harry and Draco, and from Hamilton, we have Hamilton and Burr. Then you could also look at a foil pair that comes together. So they start off clashing, they start off contrasting, but in the course of the text, they learn from each other, they become more friendly, they sometimes absorb each other's qualities. And so from Star Wars, you might have Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. So in sum, there are three main types of characters that we like to look at: the dynamic, static, and foil pairs. Their change or lack of change can help reveal theme. Remember, theme is what the author is trying to say about being human, about living a challenging life. And they have to do that through characters. Some characters will not change, and that will be revealing. Some characters will change, that will also be revealing. And some foil pairs will stay at odds, or they will come together. And again, the reasoning behind them staying at odds or coming together helps reveal what the author is trying to say about humanity. So our job is to notice those character patterns, track the change, and make a reasonable interpretation and tie that to theme. So that is about it. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please bring those into class. We'll get those answered for you. Otherwise, we will see you soon.